how do we start with having difficult conversations? How do we pass this fear and thinking and assumptions about what that person's gonna think, all the negative reactions that we've assumed and cooked in our head? How do we cross that and start with having this difficult conversation? So the first and the foremost thing is start with empathy. Empathy is so important. Many a time in our assumptions, in anger, in fear, we lose out on the most beautiful and the purest form of human expression, emotion, relation is empathy. So start with empathy towards yourself, towards why you're having this difficult conversation. Because when you start with empathy, you automatically just drop all negative points about them, assumptions and everything, and you start from a very open-minded space where you are open to hear. You're not jumped to a conclusion about certain scenario or why they did this or why this is so, whatever is the why. You come into the picture with a much more liberal attitude, which makes it easier for them to communicate and express. Because if you would go with an attacking way, they probably wouldn't even it would just be like a battle. So start with empathy. So you go with a very clean energy to really have this difficult conversation, not to have a battle. So that's important. The next is when you start having this conversation, plan it firstly. The timing is so important of the conversation, because you don't want to have this difficult conversation in the middle of a very heated moment. So you maybe want to be the mature person, maybe you want to reflect about it and find the right moment when you can have this conversation. So that's very key as well. The timing is very important. Also because of your attitude in that timing as well. But because if you react, you don't need to be reactional at all. So you need to come from a very neutral space, because you are keen in solving and understanding this discomfort and work on a more peaceful, or be in a more peaceful feeling with them. So timing. The third is, don't make it about them. Don't pinpoint, don't blame. Start from how you feel. Start from where does this feeling come from? Because when you start with empathy, you should also have empathy towards yourself and communicate. Drop your fears, drop any assumptions, inhibitions, and express yourself over here without pinpointing to them, but saying about how you feel. So I think that is where with empathy and not pinpointing is you've already made a ground where the person's going to listen to you, and it's not going to be angry or reactional or anything. So the next, this is something that I always have applied in my life, and this is something that I also apply in my life when I want to have difficult conversations. Whenever I'm down, I always think about the little Varsha, when I was 5, 6, 7, about her dreams, about her fears. And when I think of her and I imagine her, I feel so much of love, and I feel I have to stand up for her, I have to fight for her, and I have to move forward for her. I think when we think of adults as the child within them, our whole perception changes. So the next point is when you're communicating with them, I don't think anybody has this in there, how to have difficult conversations. It's very personal to me, and it really works. Is when you're having a conversation, have a conversation with them from the child in you to the child in them. I repeat, have a conversation with them from the perspective of the child, the innocence in you that has felt this discomfort, that has felt this, I want to get this better, please, make me feel good, I don't like this, this child, to communicate to the child in them. And when you do that, when you communicate to the child in them, you will see all that devilness and all that demonness of theirs is just going to fall apart, and you'll see them also from a very helpless, innocent space as well. That'll help you to understand that at the end of the day, we all human beings. We all have our ups and downs. We all have our mood swings. We all have our reasons. We all have learnings that we still need to have. Everybody is not born with everything that you know. There are people in the world who don't have the same knowledge that you and I know, and vice versa. So we can't just assume. We need to understand and give and respect the humanness in them. And that's the reason I say that when you communicate from the child in you to the child in them. And that's really also very important. Mind you, it's not just about relations, also in business meetings, because when you look at the child in that 65-year-old chairman of the company, you will just understand, you just understand that it's just like, I was just making such a big deal. I just need to understand this man or this woman, This theory, this method, I was saying strategy, but it's actually a method to communicate from the child within you to the child within them. Like, love and empathy will really reflect, and you'll focus on like the core of the communication that you really want to get across, and you will learn astoundingly like a lot out of it. So both of you, actually both sides, and you'll also like gain so much of wisdom and raise your self-respect, not only in your eyes but also in the eyes of the other. Now that you've communicated from the child within you to the child to them, like with empathy, with like not jumping to conclusions, with an open mind, what's the next step that you do? So you ask them, how do you feel about what I have said? You ask them, you don't interrupt. You let them speak. You see what is their reaction, what is their perception. Like, hear them out, hear them, and like, let them communicate and let them express. Ask them how they feel. Ask them their whys, like what's the reason. Ask them how do they feel about what you have communicated, and what do they think. And when they express what do they think, this is your opportunity. So don't be silent and afraid about like not communicating and making the questions that are there in your head. If it's here, ask them with respect, education, and empathy, and ask them why. Like, ask them, and you'll just have such a big understanding. Perhaps you'll just realize that whatever you were thinking or whatever this was is a completely different thing that you've been cooking in your head. It doesn't even exist. So in this moment is something that you will discover that you perhaps have not ever discovered because you've never had this conversation.